Hello and welcome to Sustain, the podcast where we talk about sustaining open source for the long haul. Who are we? Where did it come from? Where are we going? How can we use student interns to get there faster? Very excited to talk to our guest today. Before I introduce them, I have the privilege of introducing our host today. We have Eriol Fox joining us. Eriol from Bristol, how are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Good. It's good to have you, as always. And I am, of course, Richard Littauer. Hello, everyone. We are your two Sustain hosts, and we're very excited today to talk to not one, but two guests. Yes, this is a four-person podcast. Many voices brings often broth. I don't know, some metaphor. I'm joined today by Daniel Schoen and Jeff Young. Both of these people come from Curious, the community for research institutions and universities open source program offices, which I think I've just messed up the acronym, which is fine. Academic OSPOs. They work in universities in the US, and both of their OSPOs are very interesting because both of them focus on students a bit more than other OSPOs. Not every OSPO does. We can get into that later. You haven't heard them yet, and so I'm going to introduce them. Jeff, how are you doing today?
Doing good. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks for coming on. Jeff is calling in today from Georgia, from beautiful Atlanta, where he is the director at the OSPO at Georgia Tech. And we're also joined by Daniel Schoen. Daniel, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having us both.
Thanks for coming on. Daniel is joining as the program director for the OSPO at SLU, which is St. Louis University. Since this is an OSPO podcast, that's really cool. For our guests who don't know what OSPOs are or what OSPOs in an academic setting are, I'd like you to talk a tiny bit about your OSPO and what it looks like. So, Jeff, tell me about Georgia Tech.
Sure. We're a research university. We have a pretty large student population. I think now we're up to something like 50,000 students. So our OSPO, has sort of two focuses. One is obviously what they call an R1 research university. So we have a lot of people creating kind of research software, and they have a lot of questions about things like open source licensing, publishing open source software, and, sometimes data and other types of products. One of the big priorities that we have is focusing on our students and kind of training and educating them. And so that's one of our big priorities. Despite doing a lot of research, we really care about, do our students know about open source? Do they have ways to engage with it? And are they aware of the wider world of open source?
Jeff, you also do that under a different hat as the director of the VIS program, right? Do you want to say what that is?
Yeah, so I'm also a co-director for what we call the Center for Scientific Software Engineering. And that is a program that's funded by nonprofit Schmidt Sciences. And that actually is sort of a service center for open source scientific software. So we work with researchers who may be working on other projects with Schmidt Sciences. And then they come to us and they say, I have a software prototype. And we try to help make that into sort of a software product. So that is something that is a little bit more robust, hopefully can be sustained a little bit better and used by a wider community than just the group that created it.
Sounds very much like research software engineering, which is another topic we've covered a fair amount on this podcast.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter at all if you don't have good throughput for getting students into that. So it's good that you dabble in both. But someone who dabbles in only one of those things is Daniel Schoen. Daniel, tell me about the OSPO at SLU.
So St. Louis University started our OSPO in the summer of 2022. And I was teaching as an adjunct working in industry at the time. And it seemed like an interesting opportunity to tackle some of the challenges that I was seeing from the industry side in terms of having new software engineers show up on the job ready to do work, ready with all the skills that they actually needed, and also to tackle some of the sustainability challenges that I was seeing from industry in terms of supporting open source. So our program at its core is built around experiential learning, and it sits sort of at the intersection of research software engineering and open source. So we basically pair students and teams in our capstone course with a near peer mentor, usually a grad student or someone more advanced, and try and give them additional support with industry fellows to provide additional mentoring, and then pair them with a client who's usually some sort of researcher across the university. We're not as big as Georgia Tech. We're only about 15,000 students at St. Louis University, but we are an R1 Jesuit university. And so the ability to think creatively about how to solve problems in research is really important for us, and stretch every dollar is really important for us. So we match these students with these real research problems and build real solutions, anything from prototypes all the way through full products, with products being the sort of gold standard of what we are aiming for in building something. So we try to make it as real as possible. I call the students that I work with developers. They're not students, they're actual developers. So
how many students are you working with in your program?
Right now we've got about 80, a little over 80. At any given time we had anywhere from like 30 to, I think our peak now, we've sort of peaked in enrollments for a little while. But
And Jeff, how many students do you have that you normally work with?
We do a little bit different. We do like a summer program. I will say very loosely summer code inspired. I think we have about 30 students that are kind of paid through the program. And then we have some number of volunteers that sort of varies, maybe about 10 or 15. So in terms of scale, we're not quite at the scale that SLU is at, but we're trying to use the time to kind of build strategies to run a bigger program and to do training and things associated with that.
So, Jeff, you mentioned about ways that students engage with open source. And I'm really curious to know a little bit more about what are the main ways that students, in your experience, want to engage with open source. And of course, I want to also hear from Daniel on that as well.
We have sort of a strong culture of undergrad research. And so a lot of people look at some of the courses that they take or the faculty and staff that they work with and look at some of the things they're doing and seeing if they have open source associated with it. And if so, they're like, okay, I really would like to contribute to, maybe that quantum chemistry package, or I mentor a student who does quantum computing compiler. And that seems to be a real draw to students because they're like, oh, this is super unique. Probably some of it is a little bit driven in terms of, okay, can I put this on my resume, if I'm looking for internships and things like that. But definitely they just seem to kind of seek out sort of interesting projects that have some connection to the Institute. I would say, too, we do have a student club that was started sort of as an offshoot of our summer program. They decided that they were going to sort of diverge and focus on Libra or, free software. And so that means a little bit something different, in terms of the audience and the community. But both of those are, potential avenues that students are very interested in. I'll hand it over to Daniel.
That was a great answer. I love that. So because of the way our program is structured, I end up interacting with basically every single computer science student that comes through the program. And students end up enrolling in a major for a variety of reasons. My parents said I have to sign up for something, or I couldn't go to get a philosophy degree, so I had to do something real or practical or whatever. So we get a range of responses from students who are deeply engaged and have built up years of hackathon experiences and years of internships at big tech companies, all the way to the student who is like not quite sure why they're there, but they know that it's a good career maybe, and they wanted to just figure everything out. And so giving the students who are finding their way and maybe don't even have a GitHub account to be able to engage with open source and help them scaffold up some of their skills, all the way to the students who are deeply invested and engaged in the wider technical community, giving them opportunities to contribute to upstream projects is sort of the range of things that we see and try to encourage.
Do you find that a lot of students come in, Daniel, with having that hacking experience, or are they new to the open source world? And
Yeah, that's a great question. The distribution, I think, is probably like some sort of standard distribution, and we see people at both ends of that tail. The bulk of them have probably set up a GitHub account when they took software engineering, or they took one of the earlier courses that they may have required it for a project, and they may or may not have really touched it since. But there's definitely like 10 or 15% who are deeply engaged, and like 10 or 15% who I'm still a little lost and they need help even a couple of weeks in. And so we try to make sure that everybody is on a path towards their ultimate success.
that mirrors us as well. And that we have some people who have done a lot, and then some people who have a GitHub and it has maybe a class assignment, but they're interested to learn more and kind of contribute to a long-running project.
My next question, I may be getting to the big questions quickly, which is, what do you think students uniquely bring to the sustainability of open source software from your experience?
This is something that we thought about because I mentioned our program as sort of summer of code inspired, and I've actually done a little bit of digging in terms of how the mentorship model and the program works there. There they have kind of projects, they have long-running projects, and they advertise, and people engage pretty early on, and they sort of go through a selection process. So you get really good developers, and they're contributing, some meaningful features to the open source code, that's awesome. We would like to do that too, but we also know that, I think as Daniel mentioned, that everybody is on, sort of a spectrum in terms of where they are in terms of their development journey and their open source journey. And there are things that they contribute that don't have to be, a major code feature. So we had this example, and this is kind of a focus of our program where we try to select students from different majors, not just pick computer science developers or software focused students, and try to pick people from, say, mechanical engineering, nuclear engineering. We are mostly engineering. I should be clear with that. That is just the way we are. But those students may not be the greatest developers, but they still have a great perspective and insight that really helps kind of grow and diversify some of these open source projects. And so a really good example, we had a student who admittedly said he wasn't a great developer, but he worked on PyTorch. PyTorch has this really interesting thing called the Dockathon. And this student sort of jumped in and invested a bunch of time. He came in, I think it was like second or third place in the Dockathon, got some perks from doing that. And then that actually drove him to sort of engage even more. And then he actually did end up making some code contributions to the main line of the project there. So, I think students have sort of different viewpoints, different perspectives, and that kind of helps you grow your project and can help you demonstrate that your community is, bigger and more diverse and might have different needs than the core developers anticipate. And it kind of gives you additional sort of benefits and features that you might not think about.
Love that. From my perspective, one of the things that I really appreciate about having students involved is that it brings them into the wider community, having them have an opportunity to build relationships that are not just meeting somebody at a conference and shaking a hand and then that's it, but actually are real working relationships. In some ways, our program is tied to things like workforce development as sort of a general category of sort of educational programs. And so those professional connections are great, but also just sort of the ongoing commitment to being involved in open source as a community endeavor, not just as a commercial endeavor, I think is really powerful. We are fundamentally social creatures in many ways. So helping people find a sense of belonging is really, really valuable for them. And I think it makes for stronger communities overall.
I guess that leads into my next question. Increasingly, I'm noticing that maintainers are pretty burnt out and tired and don't want to be around open source or each other or themselves, which is, a bit much, but it's really hard out there to be an open source maintainer right now and to be on a project. And that's not just AI, that's also waves hands the whole world, but it's just difficult. How do you help students find maintainers who have time for them to work with them? How do you help foster those connections? Because you can't do that for every single student. So what structures do you have in place to help students actually find a home in open source projects?
So our structure is fun in a way in that I don't have to put pressure on upstream projects to find maintainers to support the contributions from students. The tech leads that we run internally that act as near peer mentors effectively act as the maintainer of the month or the maintainer of the year for that particular product that they are responsible for. And so they get not only to take pressure off of upstream maintainers, they actually get a sense of what being a maintainer is like. So they understand the pressures of having people submitting multiple requests, and that can create burnout for them. And so hopefully it helps create a sense of empathy for maintainers of bigger projects that are out there. When I do come across students who are especially engaged and I want to connect them with bigger upstream projects, it's usually an opportunity that involves some sort of thing that their team otherwise would not be able to do locally, but is tied to the work that they're already doing. So it builds on the capabilities that they're developing. And that because they've got a sense of the process and the pressures that are involved, I think even then they tend to have a better sense of what them asking for a code review actually means for the other people. We have a handful of teams that we run internal services for. So like an infrastructure team and an analytics team and a cybersecurity team that are providing services for other developers in our program. And so for those projects, especially where they may or may not be working towards an open source product that they're developing, I actively seek out upstream projects for them. And so finding projects that I can curate, whether it's like the GitTough project that has some ties to academia already through NYU, or the Chaos Project, which has a really vibrant and active community, but connecting the Chaos Project as something that the dev analytics team can realize that the work that they're doing is actually really incredibly valuable. It's not necessarily just this little dashboard that they're doing. Like, no, people really care about the work. And so the work is important and valuable.
Daniel, you mentioned near-peer mentoring. Do you do any training for those near-peer mentors, or is it kind of experiential where you're like, okay, you are a secondary maintainer and,
Yeah. It would be really hard for me to maintain the number of projects that we're at this point.
Mhm.
Early on, it was definitely possible. And there were, as we were learning how to do what we were doing, that was really important to have that attention. But I would definitely hit burnout if I were managing 26 projects actively.
Oh, yeah.
So for us, we have a variety of things like a workshop that we run prior to the start of each semester so that the tech leads can get a sense of how to be a maintainer. It's building open leadership tools. So they have both conceptual and practical tools at their disposal to be maintainers. And then the tech leads are typically enrolled in a separate course that also allows us to meet one additional day a week. And we can go over both topics that are related to software engineering, maintenance, sustainment of open source. We can talk about all the ethical and legal dimensions of open source. We can talk about even just the dynamics of working with other people and managing the team that you have in front of you, as well as external contributors. And all those dimensions become really important. So
that's something where we're still trying to figure out. I think we're at a smaller number of projects. We typically do about 14 or 15 projects and a couple of students per project, but we have some sort of light touch training that we do for mentors and maintainers. But I think there is sort of this desire to grow the program. And we're also looking at kind of doing like a course-based structure. Georgia Tech has this undergraduate research thing called vertically integrated projects that, seems like it is not quite the same thing as what SLU has, but it's, somewhere between like a research and a capstone type thing, and would be a good fit for open source engagement in this fashion. But we do get a lot of requests from folks. They're like, okay, how do I be a maintainer? And so we've had a couple meetings and have talked about it. But, I really like this idea of sort of the supporting, kind of class and sort of touch points, where you have this hierarchy, but you also have kind of the ability for those near peers to say, okay, I don't have it all figured out, but I have some avenue to go back and get some of Daniel's time and figure it out. So that's great. I think I'm going to take this to heart here.
Yeah, one of the things that's been important to learn in this process, and one of the things that I reinforce for the tech leads, is that they're not a graduate assistant. They're not instructing their team members, and they're not managing their team members. They are leading the team, and that's a different dynamic. They have to think about it in terms of service to the team. And it ends up being effectively more like a flat organizational structure. The titles are there to indicate expertise and ability, but not necessarily restrict who can do what and who can talk to who. So we end up having a really great set of conversations about how do you, from any position in an organization, drive change and drive outcomes. So that's a fun side effect of that.
It's really fun hearing about your programs and how you've set this all up. And I'm just thinking, I really want to see all of that and steal all of that. Affectionately, I want to take all of your ideas and implement them elsewhere. But I'm struggling how to word this question because I'm curious as to what you've always wanted to do additionally to what you're already doing. If you had $1 million or whatever you needed to have, you could magically have. I wonder what the dream program looks like for both of you with the experience you have with the students and the OSPOs.
I have an answer for this actually. And we're kind of very slowly working towards it. There's a couple aspects. So one is sort of the working on open source, engaging with open source projects and communities. I think Daniel pointed out this great element of near-peer mentorship and team leadership opportunity for some of the students that are involved. We also have kind of focused on, there is sort of this element of software engineering as it contributes to growth and sustenance of open source projects. We think that's pretty important. If money and time and everything else were not an object, then I think what I would like to see is that at least the training that we do. So we do a couple lessons, like Daniel mentioned, a couple sort of basic software engineering type things as part of our summer program. I would like to scale it up so that every student can take that and get like a micro certification or a badge. And I'd love for them to have that be on their resume. And if they have it, for an employer or someone else to look at it and say, okay, cool. They have some basic software engineering skills. They've worked with open source. They know kind of how to engage with some of these communities. So we are kind of slowly working on a platform to try to do that. I think the other thing, we all have these capstone type programs. I would love for every student to have the opportunity to engage with an open source project, whether it's one that we host or an external project, to kind of have that avenue. Because I think now even we have people who volunteer for our summer program, but there's actually so many students. We had a couple hundred students apply for a small number of slots in the program. We actually don't have enough projects and mentors and near peer mentors to be able to match them. So, I think the students that are really engaged find a way to succeed despite the total number of mentors, but being able to scale up to as many students as wanted to be engaged would be great. That's kind of my wish.
It is amazing how much $1 million feels like. But then also when you start doing the math and start trying to plan programming, it ends up being like, well, I could really use like 100 million or like 2 billion or something. It's ridiculous. If I had $1 million, I would probably try to build out. We have at St. Louis University campuses in Madrid, in Spain, as well as some very small campuses at 3 sites across Africa. And I would love to build out a program that integrates all of our campuses. The work that I do is largely centered in our campus in St. Louis, Missouri, in the United States, but the program has had light contact with our other campuses. I've tried to do some coordination work with the faculty in the computer science department in the Madrid campus, and I've worked with the program that has campuses across Africa to do building open source skills workshop as a pilot activity last summer. And to be able to do something that would enable all of our campuses and to integrate with the wider community, we started our program servicing researchers on campus as our primary customer base, but we also started getting requests from the wider community. So we did a project to help a local nonprofit that accepts bicycles and computers and refurbishes them and gives them to kids in the community after they go through some light safety and security training. And another organization that works with homeless shelters and getting volunteers coordinated at homeless shelters. So being able to take the muscles and the skills that we've developed in terms of building open source that supports science and having a wider global reach that engages with the wider tech community beyond the technology that enables human flourishing and prosperity.
I really like that. I like working with other universities as well, or other campuses, and trying to engage students that aren't just where you are. I know that both of you have been grant funded through the Sloan Foundation initially for doing this work, and probably other foundations as well. We mentioned Schmidt Sciences. And it's difficult to keep soft money rolling. It's great to switch to hard money, as it's called, which is institutional funding directly of the university. That's more like tenure track. That's always very tough. But that's only one stakeholder. Funders are one stakeholder out of many. There's also the administration at universities. There's also the teachers you're working with, the maintainers you work with, the parents of the students, I dare say, things like that. I'm just curious, what are the best stories or tricks that you've found for making people excited about this work? What could other people take away as really great, sound bites that you found worked really well for you when talking about getting students excited about open source?
I think it's folks generally, especially students, seem to be really enthused about open source. And I'm coming at this from the millennial generation, but so I know students today have not experienced, maybe what I experienced with the growth of Windows and Linux, and, everyone now has an iPhone or Apple laptop. I think it is sort of this different world from a lot of the technology you interact with. And it's like you can run some software, you run some simulation, and then you can go and inspect it and you can go change it. And, now with Gen AI can help you change it. You can say, okay, there's this open source project, I can pull the code, I can do something interesting with it. I can make it do what I want. And so that really is a good way to build excitement. I think for us, when we think institutionally, there are different priorities that institutes have and all the different stakeholders have. Obviously, and I'd be interested in sort of what Daniel thinks is for us, everyone is like, okay, how is Gen AI, how is it affecting software development? And so, we try to sort of think about this from the perspective of sort of there's using it as like a development tool, but then there's also just the effect on kind of the wider open source ecosystem. And, long running projects, how do we keep those going? How do we keep them from incurring AI slop, or other things as part of their code bases? And so there's just a lot of interest and excitement. It doesn't necessarily just have to be like, okay, we're doing Gen AI. It's like, okay, how does this fit in kind of the wider ecosystem of all the tools and software that you use? And the fact that you can go and look at it and then work with it, it's just an added benefit, I think. So I don't know. Daniel, what about you?
Yeah, I think to get people excited, the future's in robots. We should probably put a pin in Gen AI and come back to that. I have a lot of fuss there. I'm very excited about generative AI and LLMs, coding agents. I think there's a lot of potential there and a lot of risk that we should probably think thoroughly about as we embrace these tools, because there is value there, but there's also, like I said, risk. But in terms of getting people enthused about open source, I see a range of responses all the way from classic sort of institutional trepidation of it being sort of a hobby domain rather than being digital infrastructure, all the way through unfamiliarity with not just students, but even people within the institution who just, it's not in their world, so they don't think about it. And so the thing that I think has been consistently useful, I'm definitely a storyteller and an aspirational thinker on a lot of fronts. And I had a student tell me at the end of last semester during a course retro, more grounded, fewer aspirations. And I think that really resonates because the things that have moved the needle when talking with institutional partners is what is the impact to them? What do they care about? And so making sure that whatever stories we tell have the data to drive decision makers in understanding that there is real impact in the work that we're doing, and that the open source projects that are out there aren't there to just do weekend tinkering, and they're incredibly valuable for society at large. I like to point out to people that you wouldn't have stoplights, you wouldn't have hospitals without Linux running in all these places and all these other systems that we don't even think about. So helping people make that connection can be helpful. Helping people see the connection that applies directly to their life, their personal individual situation, which really, it takes time to do that. You have to get to know the person to understand what they care about. And that in and of itself is valuable. That helps build relationships and connections. So, yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I really want to quickly point out there's another OSPO that does a lot of work with students, which is in Syracuse. And Syracuse is the only town in America that has a traffic light where the lights are reversed. And it's just been that way forever. So the whole traffic lights in OSS, someone programmed that. It was a programming decision. You did say let's put a pin in Gen AI. I unfortunately am going to have to pull that pin out because we are done. We are running up on time. And I think that was actually a fairly good place to go, talking about the impact of the students, the impact on their lives and on their learning. It's been great to have both of you on. I really appreciated it. Where can people go to learn more about Georgia Tech? Jeff?
I think we're on LinkedIn and the socials, and we have a website. It's ospocc.edu. I know the whole spelling, but you can look up OSPO at GT, and that's an easy way to find us.
You can also find it in the show notes because Jeff is going to put it in the chat, and we will put it online at podcast.
Yes.
That's at stoss.org. And Daniel, where can people go to learn more about SLU?
We are also on LinkedIn and socials, and we have a website at oss-slu.github.io. And our main university site is slu.edu.
Thank you so much. It's been great having you both on. Don't leave yet. At the end of every podcast, for no obvious reason, the obvious reason is Eric Berry, the co-founder of this podcast, we have Spotlight. And Spotlight is where we point out other people, projects, or things that we're just particularly like right now that we think are really, really cool. Traditionally, the host goes first. Eriol, what is your Spotlight today?
My spotlight today, I don't think I've spotlighted it before, but maybe somebody can tell me, at me on a social and be like, you've spotlighted this before, is scienceux.org. You might know the person that has founded scienceux.org as the Better Posters guy. That might be a more recognizable name. Mike Morrison, who works for CurveNote, I believe, is doing all manner of amazing things in the world of usability design and UX in science and research.
That is super, super cool. Thank you so much. My spotlight today is A, Eric Berry, because he's the best, but B, Logeon. I'm actually not sure how to pronounce this, and I probably should. It is an awesome project out of U Chicago that has dozens of Latin and Greek dictionaries that you can search automatically. I use this on a daily basis, and I'm sure now that you know about it, you will too. Highly, highly suggest checking out Littauer. It's hard to spell, so look up the link. But literally, if you ever want to know a Latin and Greek word, this is where you do it. And I'm pretty sure the dictionaries are open source under copyright stuff on their GitHub. Corpus Corporum is also good, but Littauer gives me the best run for my money for when I need a definition really fast. Jeff, what is your spotlight today?
I want to log roll a little bit. The Software Center, we work on a lot of open source software. Probably people have used this, but there's an app, iNaturalist, that we worked with recently. They have this huge database of images, and to try to make it more searchable and hopefully to help you do some like AI-enabled search. So I think we finished that project. If you're interested in learning more, you can look up our Software Center, the Center for Scientific Software Engineering. You really see an enthusiastic community built on open source there.
If you need help with INET listeners, you can go to my INET profile. I put it in the link. It's in the show note. INET's the best. Daniel, what's your spotlight today?
I love that. So I'm going to call out hopefully a classic for everybody, processing.org and P5JS. I, many years ago, downloaded a very early beta of processing when it was a Java IDE. And I got a lot of value as an undergrad using that tool and playing with it and just literally playing with it. And I learned so much through playing. And when I returned to my alma mater to teach as an adjunct, I was teaching Intro to CS, multimedia with P5JS. It's still one of my favorite places to just sort of goof off. They're called sketches. And I love that they're called sketches because you can literally just doodle, or you can work out something that is really detailed and get something truly beautiful. I love that project.
If you're interested in learning more about P5, you can check out episode 274, where we interviewed Q Ye or Xianxian Ye about P5. That was really, really fun. P5 is super, super cool. Thanks for highlighting that, Daniel. And thank you, listeners, for bearing with us today. It's been really exciting to have these two guests on and talk about students and open source. If you like this podcast, there are several things you as a listener have agency and you can do besides listen. 1, go to opencollective.com/sustainoss and donate. 2, go to podcast@sustainoss.org and look at the show notes, look at other episodes. 3, share that link with your friends. Share it with your enemies. I really don't care who you share it with, just share it. 4, you can go to your company and ask them to donate. 5, you can like this podcast on, Apple, Spotify, wherever you're getting this podcast delivered to you in your inbox. And you can then put it out to other people through their inboxes, which would be really, really great. You can follow us on Mastodon and LinkedIn. And you can go to our discourse at, I think it's discourse.sustainoss.org. It's one of those things. It's on the Sustain website. You can go check it out. You can also join us on June 11th. We're having a special event on implications of AI for open source. It's going to be like a 3-hour online virtual thing. You can go right now to sustainoss.org and click on the link. Highly, highly suggest that you check it out. This is the first time I'm mentioning it publicly. I will be sending out more blasts about this later, but definitely do join us for a discussion about, what does it all mean about AI and open source? It's going to be really, really exciting. And if you have any thoughts or comments, you can always send me an email at podcast@sustainoss.org. That also goes to all the other hosts, so you can complain about me and they can all listen to it. That would be really, really great. And thank you all for being on this podcast. Thank you, Jeff and Daniel. Really appreciated your time today. Daniel, your hand is raised. Do you want to have the final word?
You put the pin back in.
Oh, I did. All right. Well, now it's out. Thanks, everyone. Bye.